Good morning. Welcome to the plenary. We're starting a couple minutes early because we're doing a lot of fun things in this plenary. The first of which is we are doing a spoken word piece that is backed by popular demand from St. Louis's opening plenary. We have Heather Higginbottom from the city of Bozeman in Montana, and she's doing a piece on holistic adaptation, the theme of the plenary.
Thanks, Laura. I had planned on having this memorized, but you guys are so inspiring that I've been rewriting it all week. So I have to cheat. How in the world did we get here, where catastrophic fires and floods are the new normal, and the North Pole is 50 degrees warmer, where Miami is underwater and the middle class is underwater, where the oceans are dying and data and glaciers and empathy are disappearing, and my backyard is soon to be the park formerly known as Glacier. It's been a long time coming, but who could have predicted this time of alternative facts and tweets where science gets confused with beliefs? We are the only country in the world still debating, and half our politicians don't think twice about playing Russian roulette with our future, making Faustian bargains, and trading our fate on the New York Stock Exchange. There is no way to fix this that isn't uncomfortable or hard. We need a change of climate in a different sense of the word. It's no longer enough to strive for less bad, and all the toolkits in the world cannot save us from ourselves. Reversing climate change is the only chance we have. This isn't some far-fetched radical fantasy. We already have the technology, but technology alone can't repair community. The fate of humanity is at stake. The planet will be just fine without us. It's up to us to decide if we want to stay. We have to choose holistic adaptation or disintegration, equity or refugees, vulnerability or a just society, drawdown or societal breakdown. We have reached the tipping point where the benefits of doing something outweigh the costs of doing nothing. But money is heavy and the free market isn't free. And somehow, oops, my bad, has become an exit strategy. Fortunately, courage is free. So is connection. But what do I know? I'm just a middle-class, privileged white woman from America. No, I'm just a girl who cares a whole awful lot about this world. I'm just a mama bear protecting her cub. I'm just a human standing on the shoulders of movements, the civil rights movement, environmental movement, women's rights movement, science movements, climate movements, human rights movements. I am just a human standing arm in arm with my fellow humans, and we, the people of planet Earth, are demanding a New Deal. Because we believe in a world where community is stronger than GDP, where urgency outweighs apathy, where compassion eclipses complacency, and truth trumps politics. Creating this world will take all of us, fighting together on the front lines in this war against ignorance. Which side of history do you want to be on? You have the choice. Lift up the voices in your communities as leaders, as warriors. Every voice counts, and it's time to warrior up, because this earth, our humanity, is worth saving.
Thank you, Heather. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce the plenary that was kind of my favorite plenary in the creation because it brings together all of the other plenaries. It's like not having to pick a favorite child because you say the whole family is. That plenary is being led by a longtime colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Jordan West from the US EPA. For those of you who do not know, today is I Love EPA Day, so let's all give Jordan the warmest welcome.
Thank you. That was an amazing spoken word performance, and just yesterday we were talking about the importance of bringing more of the arts to the forum, and yeah. And I'm really relieved that we had this great performance because Laura and the panelists were not disposed to my suggestion that maybe I could give my opening remarks through interpretive dance. But I decided not to do that because it's not really my thing. But again, my name is Jordan West. I'm with the EPA's Office of Research and Development, and our group specializes in global change impacts and adaptation research. We have different members of our group that work on air quality, water quality, human health, and ecosystem health. And that's a perfect example of how many of our institutions and organizations are set up. We break things into units or chunks or groups that we can use to get our head around various issues across different sectors and across different levels of organization. And that is naturally just the way we organize ourselves as humans. So how then do we move toward a more holistic approach toward adaptation that can break down some of those walls? So what we've done is pull together a panel, and I don't know if we could get the first slide with our panelists listed. Great. We have found 4 excellent examples of folks working across some of these lines in moving toward a more holistic approach. So our working definition of holistic adaptation is climate adaptation that views humans and the environment as a single system. So what we've done is we've tasked our panelists with giving some brief remarks along a few themes. What does holistic adaptation mean to you and look like in your work? So in the context of your project, and in terms of planning for the future, in what ways are you moving toward holistic adaptation? And this means, how does your work harmonize across different sectors, potentially, such as people and natural resources, water for people, water for the environment, urban versus rural, across different jurisdictions, county and state lines, boundaries, federal, state, tribal, local communities, and even individual landowners. And so no project can really do all of those things at once, but we're all, I think, trying to move in a direction where we begin to work more across those lines. And then, of course, a major theme of the forum is the idea of climate justice, equity, and poverty alleviation, and how do we then fold that in. So this is just the first of the very beginning conversation I think that we need to have about this. It's a very complex issue. We can get very deep and complex in any one sector, much less trying to overlay them all against on top of each other. But these 4 examples are really, I think, leading the field in moving in that direction. So I want to just briefly introduce the panel, and then they'll make some remarks, and then hopefully in fairly short order we will take questions and interactive discussion with the audience. So as you're listening to these presentations, maybe you can think about what holistic adaptation means to you and in your work, and be ready with some great questions for the panelists. So on my left is our California group from the San Francisco Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, Nahal Gogai and Colin Bailey. Nahal is building from her watershed protection work with Native American tribes in the Pacific Northwest and coordinates the water justice program for the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. And Colin is an accomplished social justice attorney and has turned executive director of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. Next, we have Jennifer Hirado. She's with the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, and Jennifer's responsible for administration of the county's climate and sustainability initiatives, water resource policy and planning, environmental monitoring, and shoreline and marine conservation activities, among others. Our next is Chris Hilke. He is with the Community Risk Reduction through Comprehensive Coastal Resiliency Enhancement for the Great Marsh Ecosystem in the Upper North Shore of Massachusetts. Chris's background is that he works with the National Wildlife Federation affiliates and federal, state, and local partners to build capacity across scales for climate adaptation planning and implementation. And then our final pair down here at the end from Montana is the Tribal Climate Adaptation Planning in the Crown of the Continent. And that's Melly Ruling and Gerald Wagner. Gerald is a member of the Blackfeet Nation in Browning, Montana, and is the director of the Blackfeet Tribe's environmental programs. And Melly is deputy director of the Center for Large Landscape Conservation in Bozeman, Montana, and works on large landscape issues across multiple scales and jurisdictions. So what we're going to do now is turn to each of those examples for some remarks, and we will start with Nahal and Colin.
Thank you very much. From an environmental justice perspective, it comes down to this. Our response to climate change is our society's greatest opportunity for racial reconciliation and healing in a generation. Systemic social environmental racism is maladaptive, and not just from a climate adaptation perspective. The water-related impacts of climate change, drought, flood, sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, along with other impacts, extreme fire, higher costs of energy because of less hydropower, air quality from toxic particulates from dry lake beds and industrial farmlands. Within California alone, upwards of 2 to 3 million people without access to safe, clean, affordable water. Those costs, those impacts are borne disproportionately by low-income communities of color. This is a product of a history of racialized and inequitable land use planning, born out of the use of redlining, racially restrictive covenants, and for tribes, a campaign of genocide and dispossession. Few places exemplify these racially disparate impacts more than the highly diverse San Francisco Bay Area, where the wealth of that region masks an unconscionable income and opportunity gap. Fortunately, man-made problems do have man-made solutions. The environmental justice movement has matured quite a bit. In 2012, the state of California became the first state in the nation to adopt a human right to water policy, which changed the political discourse around water, and not just for drinking water and sanitation. It coincided with the rise of environmental justice voices rising to the top levels in the legislature and the executive branches. In 2014, Proposition 1, a statewide general obligation water bond, had $51 million for a disadvantaged community involvement program, $6.5 million of which we will administer as the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Thank you. So the Prop 1 DAC involvement program is comprised of conducting a needs assessment alongside our technical partners as well as our grassroots partners. And our inquiry will be based in water issues, water quality, water affordability, et cetera, but we'll also examine the broader context of issues such as gentrification, healthcare, jobs, and other social opportunities. So we'll be working on capacity building not only alongside our community partners, but also helping our agency partners with capacity building on how to equitably engage those communities in the water governance process. So that'll be from start to finish, and we also are hoping to highlight a case study of underrepresented communities, at least one with homeless populations, and we have counterparts working with the local tribes as well. The core of the program is to address access to power and watershed level governance. For example, the Bay Area Integrated Regional Water Management Coordinating Committee recently voted on creating new positions for the voting body, and those positions will comprise 1/4 of the full voting body, and they will be comprised of DAC members or disadvantaged community members and tribal members. So we're leveraging this work with other efforts throughout the region. For example, we're involved in Measure AA guidelines and RFP development. That's work that's putting $25 million a year for the next 20 years throughout the Bay Area for Bay Health on wetland restoration projects. So we're working with the State Coastal Conservancy as well as the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority on that. We're also working alongside our coalition partners at the Resilient Communities Initiative on equitable engagement in sea level rise issues with the Bay Area Conservation and Development Commission. And all of these projects will lead to implementation of water projects and also a list of other projects that are ready for development. So overall, we're creating a new water governance paradigm that's born out of a set of these new relationships in each of the decision-making venues.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay, Jennifer.
Thank you. Oh, well, I am here representing the 4 counties of Southeast Florida, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe County. to talk about the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. It's a coordinated initiative focused on shared climate mitigation and adaptation challenges, really crossing through a number of areas of critical concern, including planning for future sea level rise, energy security and independence, protection of our natural systems, water resource sustainability, community sustainability, economics. Our partnership, although it began with the 4 counties, has really expanded, and especially in the early days, to include the Nature Conservancy, recognizing that adaptation in our region is really dependent on the preservation of the quality, quantity, and diversity of natural resources that are at the heart of community livability and the economics of our region. We also appreciate that adaptive responses within the built environment without an adequate consideration for the natural systems could be in the long term at the detriment to our communities, and could also have cascading impacts that complicate conditions for our neighbors. And with the recognitions that we share these resources, whether they're our coastal reefs, our coastal resources, our water resources, our beaches, the Everglades, that the activities of our region need to be coordinated and reflecting a hybrid approach of gray and green infrastructure. So the Nature Conservancy has been a key partner. We've emphasized resilient redesign, as many of you might have heard yesterday in the workshop, in trying to ensure a green landscape as part of our redevelopment and resiliency initiatives in the built environment. The compact has also served as an organizational structure focused around coastal ocean conservation strategies. That effort has brought new resources to monitoring initiatives and state engagement on the conservation activities focused on coral reef sustainability. We have also relied heavily on the resources of our academic community in bringing additional expertise to the area. But one of the other components of holistic adaptation, I think, is really the cross-sectoral participation in engaging both our private partners, such as the business community, and their leadership and their clout to some of the very large projects that we know are critical for addressing large-scale resiliency initiatives that have economics well beyond the capacity of individual communities. This year, we saw advancement of a large-scale investment to support flood mitigation and water supply sustainability, coupled with environmental freshwater deliveries, an initiative that could not have advanced had we not invoked all of those arguments. And then finally, we understand that the acknowledgement of shared fates is a really critical component in our communication, that this isn't inland versus coastal communities, that we need to have a better appreciation of how community livability, community sustainability, and community economics are all intertwined. Communications is a large part of that, but we rely heavily upon the skill set of many of the community foundations and community organizations that are much better skilled and connected to the very diverse community in our region. And I want to acknowledge the efforts of Catalyst Miami, a critical group down in Miami who's really providing a model for how we expand our communications to be much more inclusive, and we as a region responsive to the shared stressors and needs of our diverse community. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, Chris.
All right, thank you, Jordan. So I wanted to take the next couple of minutes to highlight an on-the-ground project that we feel really exemplifies a holistic approach to building coastal resiliency and reducing community risk to coastal threats. So first, just a little bit of background about the project. The $3 million project was initially funded through the Department of Interior's Hurricane Sandy Resiliency Grants Program, and it's focused on the Great Marsh geography in northeastern Massachusetts. The project is led by the Great Marsh Resiliency Partnership and is directly and indirectly driven by more than 40 federal, state, municipal, and local partners. The project includes 5 subcomponents, which is each driven by a suite of partners. They include a dune nourishment and dune revegetation effort, a geography-wide hydrodynamic sediment transport and salinity model, a marsh restoration effort that's focused on invasive species management, SAV restoration, a hydrobarrier assessment looking at 1,200 hydrobarriers across the project geography, focused primarily on dams and culverts, and a community resiliency planning effort that's focused on 6 communities that are within the project geography. So, why does this project represent a holistic approach to on-the-ground adaptation? First, the project works across timescales, with certain components focused on near-term goals and immediate results, and others focused on long-term goals to inform future projects and future activities. The project also emphasizes the engagement across sectors, including business, recreation, land use planning, conservation, municipal, community group, and academic interests, among others. The project also works to engage a broad range of people, those disproportionately impacted and vulnerable, students, urban and rural populations, and those that are typically not engaged in coastal planning efforts. Lastly, the project engages managers across management jurisdictions, including federal, state, municipal, local, and privately managed lands. And so together, these elements work synergistically to enhance coastal resiliency and reduce community risk through a whole systems approach.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay, Gerald and Melly.
Testing. Is this us? This ain't us. This ain't us. There we go. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Gerald Wagner. I'm the director of the Blackfeet Tribe's environmental programs. And at this time, before we get started, I'd like to thank, the partners that I've been working with over the past 2 years on my climate change adaptation planning project, and that is the Crown of the Continent, the Large Land Conservation Group, the National Indian Health Board, and I don't see them on there, but the Great Northern Landscape Conservation Group. I'd like to, talk a little bit about the process that I'm going through in developing our tribe's climate change adaptation plan. And just to throw a little bit of perspective out there, we got to say, before we know where we're going, we got to know where we came from. And for the group to understand who we are, we got to say, where did we come from? And what were we doing? And if you want to go back 500 years, or if you want to go back 1,000 years, we were the holistic people. We were there. We were living in harmony with the environment. And as we moved forward and made our advancements, then we ran up against this wall of dominant society. And what did dominant society do was fold us into this cube that one size fits all, and brought us into this throwaway society, and this polluted society, and the society that's run by the almighty dollar. And so now we come to today, and where are we all doing? That was the wrong way. We should be holistically thinking in our processes to get where we need to be, to get back into harmony with Mother Nature. So that's where we're at today. And we could have been there a long time ago. But in doing that, I come forward working with different groups. I have 9 different aspects or sectors of my tribes and the different jobs that they do, folding them into my climate change adaptation plan. We have land, we have water, we have air, we have education, we have health, we have fish and wildlife, we have forestry, and we're all in there working together. And we're even working across the tribe. I'm partnering with the Salish and Kootenai over to the west of us on the west side of the mountains. I'm partnering with DNRC, with the BIAs, with the EPAs, and knowing that bringing all these groups together back to the circle so that we can build what we already have, that intuitive, that knowledge base that we were born with, and to get us back to that point and to get our people thinking again on that circle line and to say, we have it. We just need to put it out there in an information perspective that we can understand again, to get it back into our language, to bring our cultural people back in to say, this is what we're talking about. This is how we get back to where we should be. This is how we're going to have to adapt to make it to this next stage, because we know that the world is changing, and it is changing a lot faster than a lot of us care to realize. And so with that is where we're basing our planning for bringing into our climate change adaptability. And one of the projects that we're looking at is a beaver project. And with that, we know that the beaver is there and has created stockpiles of water, I'll say, reservoirs, feeding our wetlands, and that which feeds our lakes, which feeds our rivers, which filters out the toxics and the pollution. And it had been jokingly said around that, yeah, let's put a beaver in everybody's backyard, we'll be okay. But, you know, we'll take that and we'll move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerald. And I am working with Gerald on the climate plan, and I come from the more linear culture that he referred to, sadly, but I've been lucky to be plunged into their planning process, which you can't even talk about it as being holistic, because it's so much, you know, holistic implies that it's something separate from what you are, and they're so fully immersed in this holistic perspective that it's just the way things work, and it's fantastic. Our meeting started by inviting sort of teachers and nurses and kids, and I'm kind of going, oh my gosh, how are we going to get to any clear outcomes when working with this incredibly diverse crowd? But in fact, that was the point. If you don't bring along the entire group and the whole tribe and all the different players, then how do you move forward? I guess I would recommend that when you're doing a process like that, it requires a lot of patience, because there isn't a linear process going from A to B to C. It's very iterative, and moving the whole forward takes a lot more time than you think it might, but it's a really rewarding process. Aside from talking about integrating all the tribal members, the Blackfeet are reaching out throughout the Crown and the Continent landscape, which we're working in. It's a 22 million acre landscape. There are 27 management jurisdictions within that landscape, and all the managers are invited to any of the meetings. And when we have meetings, sometimes you'll get the tribal chief coming and talking, you'll get the council members coming, you might get interns talking, so it's a really organic and cool process. The challenge is definitely continuing to push it forward in the more linear way, because at the end of the day, we want a report that can be put on a desk. But we're working at it, and we're getting there. Thanks.
Yeah, let's give all of our panelists a hand for their presentations. So this has worked out even better than we hoped. I mean, we knew that we picked 4 really good examples, but listening to these presentations, we've really seen a very interesting array of projects at different spatial scales, coming at different sectors or different groups from sort of different angles, if you will, and different emphases, and yet still being very cross-sectoral. And I think these final comments, you know, that holistic adaptation in addition to being about breaking down our so-called silos that are professionally driven, but it's really a state of mind. It's a state of being for some people more than others. And so I think that there's a place for the highly technical and reductionist work we do, which feeds into broader principles that we develop, and then somehow we then need to marry that with philosophies and ways of thought that are perhaps more or less familiar to some of us than others. So what I want to do right now is take questions from the audience, and I think we have a microphone here, and if folks could come up, they could ask questions. And I can lead off with this question about, silos, working within silos. That's often a big challenge when you haven't even brought climate adaptation in yet. But that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, because we do, by our natures, have to specialize to some extent, because nobody can be an expert on every single thing. So how do we form and reform and keep forming and reforming different groupings so that somehow collectively, and then marry that with a thought process that allows us to collectively be more holistic? What challenges have you guys found with breaking down those silos and trying to build these projects that do cross these sectors or organizational groupings?
I think a piece of that, I think there's certainly a component to breaking down silos and trying to work outside of our historical approach is definitely true. But I think also agencies, different organizations have different systems and different approaches. And I'm not sure that often it's easy to move past those, particularly if they've been institutionalized. And so I wonder if a piece of holistic adaptation is coordination in terms of contribution and how different entities can contribute to a greater whole within their given approach or system. So I think it's multiple angles to that, but I think that I can't help but wonder if that's one of them.
Okay. I like to say that if we could visualize putting yourself out there and say, in order for us to get through the day, what do I have to do? I need to go here, I need to meet, greet, exchange information with these people. I need to go over here and do the same. We all need to be fed. We then need to do some more work. And just see how much we cross over into each other's paths and to each other's environments. And we do not live in like we said, that silo, but that we cross each other's paths many times. And when you start thinking in that aspect, it takes you out of that silo, out of that box, and then makes you start thinking more about all the different places and people that you need to interact with.
One of the challenges for us has been, when you're doing a project like this, you're responding to funders' needs and requests. You get specific pieces of it funded by people that need specific reports, and that is continually pulling you out of the holistic process. And so there's always this tension between, well, I've got this opportunity to do this right now, and it's really great, but you have to keep on this linear, in this linear direction to respond to a particular grant or a particular goal. So not that it's bad to have clear goals, but it would be nice if a lot of the people supporting this kind of work weren't just looking for numbers or specific outputs, but could look at the more holistic aspects and appreciate the fact that you're forming a community and having an open conversation, and maybe you had 4 pizza parties or whatever it is, because those things are all really important.
I was just going to, rip off of that one. The degree of fragmentation and governance around all of the things that touch on water, fire suppression, and in our view, from an environmental justice perspective, affordable housing, access to healthcare, affordable transportation, we're effectively planning for whole communities. That takes a lot of cross-silo breaking. And there are some elements that have to be present. They've come up in the previous panelists' comments. Among them are, from an environmental justice perspective, all of the challenges that we face are really a function of power and who has access to it. So fundamentally restructuring those power, all power is ultimately relational, so we develop relationships first and foremost to engage as co-equals, as humans. It always is necessary when bringing everyone to the table to have resources there available, since that helps to dislodge some of the hesitation in committing to yet another enterprise. And then this is somewhat of a self-flattering answer, but you do need people who, forgive the paradox, specialize in being generalists, who are conveners, connectors, and the people who actually bring together the big vision so that you have the facilitator's toolkit and a lot of the shared relationships to actually provide for that space in that important conversation.
A quick follow-up, is there anything about climate adaptation that either makes this more of an opportunity or more difficult when you bring in the climate adaptation piece?
The president makes it very difficult at this time when we start talking about the climate, number one. And to say that, you know, regardless of what he says, it's here, it's happening, and it's now. And it's because we are still here and coming together and speaking to say that, you know, we shall overcome that. We will not go silent, and we will not go gentle into that good night, because we have the heart. And with that, you know, the difficulties facing us now are going to be great, you know, but we've got to show that we have the strength and that we're going to keep on keeping on, regardless of what they say on the outside or from the leadership of the country. We are the ones down here on the grass, on the ground, and doing the work. So we're going to take whatever they throw at us and keep on moving forward.
I could just share that I think that in addressing the challenges of climate adaptation, we're all seeking effective models. And to the extent that we can use individual projects as demonstrations how those satisfy multiple needs, I think that helps to break down those silos, because if it's just agriculture working on its own, or if it's just the environmental entity working on its own, or if it's just the water utility working on its own, it's going to be hard to garner and organize the type of, it could be political support, it could be regulatory support, financial support, that needs to be brought to bear to address those issues. And as a society, we probably can't afford that. If you can have single projects that we can design to meet multiple benefits and bring together the partnerships that can get those projects done, we'll be able to move forward in a much more accelerated manner. And in my own experience, we have found in the advancement of a regional reservoir that we have been trying to move forward for a decade. It wasn't until we began to talk about the recognized need that everybody knows we're either in drought or managing floods. We need storage. Freshwater systems need improved water quality and guaranteed freshwater deliveries. We need recharge of the aquifer and saltwater abatement that can come through stormwater reuse. And when we began to invoke all the things we know to be true about climate pressures in this conversation, without saying specifically that this is climate change induced, we had the support of the environmental entities, the water utilities, the Department of the Interior, agriculture, the counties. And this year we were able to secure $30 million in our state budget for this project, and you know, a state that's not leading on climate change but understands the value of this particular project to all these stakeholders. So I think that's how you begin to break down the silos and understanding that we can't get it done individually. We need to figure out where we have shared interest and can find common ground.
Excellent.
So Jordan, you asked the question, is there something about climate adaptation that makes that cross-silo work harder? decidedly yes, in my perspective. We have a colleague here whose experience exemplifies this. This state of Alabama has effectively tried to write into state legislation a surcharge on renewable energy that would make it not competitive with fossil fuel extractive energies. So you have a political structure with vested interests, large corporate powerful interests, who in many cases have a stranglehold on a political party that has as its entire model pandering to for-profit industries, and they have clout still. In California, we were poised last year to advance SB 350, which would have reduced by 50% our greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 levels by the year 2030. And the Western States Petroleum Association spent $1.7 million in that year alone to lobby both Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature to erode that far-reaching and ambitious goal, which ultimately would have mitigated a tremendous amount of greenhouse gases and ultimately provided a great good in terms of sea level rise and all of the follow-on impacts. So yes, a lot harder because of that.
Interesting. So both challenges and opportunities in the two cases. Okay, let's take a question from the audience.
Hi, a question about writing reports. If you've mentioned writing reports as maybe not conducive to explaining like holistic adaptation. So I was wondering if you have thoughts about how you can convey holistic adaptation in reports better, or if there's some sort of product that you could use to supplement reports or in addition to reports that would explain like what sort of holistic adaptation is going on in your projects or in your communities. I assume a lot of people here write reports, and so I might want to know, if there are like ways to make them more holistic or convey holistic processes. Thank you.
In most of the tribal plans, there's a component of it that kind of addresses that and how the community is involved, and also in how traditional practices are involved. And so that might kind of address it. I know with the CSKT and the Blackfeet, they've done interviews with elders, and they call them visits with elders, and just let the elders talk about how things used to be, and then they'll pull out of those interviews pieces that might relate to climate change or the environment or changes that are going on, and then that can then be taught to the younger people in the community. But so including those pieces of kind of those holistic pieces in your sort of more technical vulnerability analysis I think is really important.
And within them same reports that Melly was referring to is that, we're all in that tech time now, the tech world, and that you're able to click on that picture of that visit with that elder and watch a streaming of that. And for you to hear the emotion and that historical voice adds much more to the written document than just seeing this report come out. And seeing that, I think, is a great facet that lends a lot of support and a lot of validity to the reports that we come out in the planning documents.
Just to build off that, I think that, there are so many reports sitting on shelves. And I'm not sure how much they're informing activity. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I guess it depends. But I think that being process-oriented and putting the significance on how you're getting there instead of looking at what the result is ultimately it's just a report on a table, but how meaningful that process is what really makes the difference.
And through our work, we've been tasked with a needs assessment that we'll be submitting in our final report to the California Department of Water Resources that only addresses water quality and other, flooding and affordability and other water issues. And we've been working with our Civic Spark research fellows on expanding that needs assessment and calling it a needs and assets assessment. And as we said, it'll address issues like gentrification, healthcare, et cetera. So we're planning on submitting that entire thing. So in our final report to kind of expand the minds of the people we're reporting to and help them see how holistic our project really is at its core. On top of that, I also have a background in ecosystem service evaluation. So if you're working on an ecosystem, there's a lot of ways that you can assess the co-benefits downstream to any of the work that you're doing upstream or wherever you're doing it, the results that it might have. So.
Also in the context of that work, we take the term report a little perhaps more broadly in the sense that we're developing a lot of relationships, and out of those we're going to use narrative and community-based storytelling as an important feature of not only the relationship building, but the way in which learning takes place and in which good practices are perpetuated and promulgated. So community projects may have an element of permanent artistry with them. For example, a community-based mural that recounts the process whereby it came into being. There will be obviously a report and a plan, but really what comes out of that is from a holistic perspective, and it's the way it's reported, is that it's going to be put into practice, hopefully forever hereafter, through a new paradigm of decision making that is much more holistic and integrated.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Nahal, your initial provocation or statement that we have an opportunity through understanding climate change to heal social wounds and knit together a fabric that's already there, it's just frayed, got me thinking about this lens of climate change adaptation as one that maybe brings us together with a certain focus, but as we go out into, as we intersect with other people in society, we're actually presenting an added value to them from their perspective, not about climate change, but about other issues. And Jennifer, you kind of reinforced that in my mind, that when we're going to galvanize energy and attention, I mean, your state doesn't, allow speaking about climate change often at a state level. So I think this is an important lesson to take away, is that we have this shared lens on climate change, and it's informing how we work with other people, but giving them voice and owning, for us it's co-benefits, but their benefits are the greatest ones in their participation, and we need that in order to make progress. So what do you think? Is that a good way to approach this profession?
Yes.
There is obviously a heavy need for community engagement, personal participation in the conversation, and a greater responsiveness, I think, not to just the future conditions, but of course, how are we addressing community needs today, relating the benefits of long-term planning to quality of life enhancements that will be enjoyed in the short term is really important. And trying not to isolate the process so that it seems like it's somebody else's process is something else that we're really working to overcome in the compact, and we've talked about it a lot among ourselves, is the importance of it not seeming like somebody else's initiative, but that we can all speak as kind of owning part of that we're all part of the compact, whether it is the business sector, the resident, the academic, the student, the community leader. We are in the process of updating our regional action plan, and we've enhanced the document to include focal areas that we didn't adequately address previously, like public health, like equity and engagement, and economic resilience are 3 additional areas. But we have established, I think, a fairly robust public process. We had a World Cafe, I think, a week ago, for county, inviting the public to review everything that's been compiled by the so-called experts, but what did we miss, what's lacking, a very sustained online process. And then in the past, it's been an entire year of community engagement as we work to advance the document and seek endorsements and participation and look for opportunities to better share in the responsibilities of implementation. Again, it needs to be something that we all feel like we're invested in and own in order to be successful.
Thank you. Another question from the audience? Can't see very well. Oh, there's somebody coming. Come on up. It's like the Oscars when like somebody wins who's way in the back and they're trying to hurry up.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
General question to everyone. How do we go through this process in a way that we grow the pie and that we grow the audience so that it's, we have expertise amongst us, and a lot of these processes are inside out, folks who understand each other, speak the same language. But how do we get to a place where the process engages unusual audiences, people of color, low income, mothers, students, you name it, to a point where once you develop the plan and the report, people have an understanding of their role in actually getting into implementation. And I think the point about the stuff going on in California where some of the folks that should be on our side are being co-opted by the Western Petroleum Association. And many of them are people of color for state assembly and Senate. So I think there's an opportunity here. And I think my question is, how do we grow the pie so that we're generating resources for the folks who are actually doing community organizing and are doing member engagement so that they understand their role in getting these things actually implemented?
So going back to the needs assessment, I'll have to, answer from what I've already said, which is that we're going to include every social issue, social opportunity that we can possibly include, or whatever we hear from our the community members that we survey. And we plan to engage those community members by going, we're not going to say, hey, we have a water meeting happening, you want to come? It's, no one will come to that if you just talk about water. But if you go in and you build relationships with community convening areas like churches or any type of social service center or even parks, schools, if you go there and start listening to people, listening to their stories, just asking for their stories, not saying we have money for water projects. Even starting from a holistic perspective on that, and then building into the needs assessment. And when we give that needs assessment, which we're developing with all the other 12 Bay Area integrated regional water management groups throughout the state, not Bay Area, just California, we'll be working with all of them, and we'll be coming up with a coordinated effort to bridge the silos and see where the funding opportunities might be to fill the gaps in the other parts of the needs assessment that the Prop 1 water funding won't be able to.
And then we take that needs assessment, which for the first time in the history of California water bonds takes an express focus on what the state calls disadvantaged communities under 80% of the median household income, and create a much broader and more nuanced understanding of the landscape of need. That then can go to the legislature when we are, as we are now, talking about the next bond and how it should be structured to drive to need and not necessarily purely on a population basis.
We then also need to start at the very bottom and the people that we work with. If that means going door to door sometimes to get the message out and to say, yeah, we're going to have a feed over here, and after the feed we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this issue and this concern facing us, and make sure that we can bring in some of our vocal people, some of our leaders, and take it from the bottom and build it up so that when we get that needs assessment and can push it off to the people that can carry it to that next leg of the race, then we'll get there together.
We provide endless public communications through presentations and outreach through libraries and homeowners associations and various civic groups and Rotary clubs, and it's exhaustive and it's inadequate. It's very frustrating. We need much more in the way of community foundation support, community groups who can serve as communicators. I want to celebrate the investments that Kresge has made in supporting Catalyst Miami. It's been tremendous, and we hope that the work and the lessons that are being derived from that initial investment can cascade because we are lacking an adequate level of engagement. We don't have enough in the way of existing resources, and we need many more to be educated and informed communicators and liaisons to help expand the messaging and really demonstrate where there are community interests where the community may not even realize yet. They don't maybe fully understand the nature of the impacts and how those could be mitigated, and how it's not just a matter of infrastructure improvement, it's policy decisions that elected officials are going to be making, and there needs to be a greater level of accountability.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Greetings, I'm LaShella Sims, and I'm from Minneapolis. I'm normally a community organizer, but recently I became a member of environmental justice advisory group to the Minnesota Pollution Control. And so that's a collaboration of people all around the state. And this question specifically goes to the young man from the Native American community. And one of the things that I'm hearing with a lot of the Native people, what they're saying, quietly saying, is that and I'm afraid that the voice is getting lost in all that's going on. They're quietly saying, what I'm hearing is the earth. Don't forget the water. Don't forget to do this. Don't forget to do that. And one of the women on the advisory group, she lives near, the reservations is located near a nuclear plant. And she scares the bejeebers out of me when she talks about that. But I need to hear it. What's going on out there? You need to be conscious of these things are deteriorating. And you're the second person that's talked about this beaver. So I want to go out and get me one. But but one of the things, I guess, bottom line, as you're speaking these things, do you think you're being heard with so much other stuff going on around here that we need to hear also? And I'm picking up on it, so I'm paying attention to what you're saying. But do you think that your voice is getting lost, or how can your voice, if you think it's getting lost out there, how can it be elevated for people to really be paying attention and include what you're saying in all this? Thank you.
Well, I believe that comes down to being physically here, being vocally here at forums like this. I was fortunate enough to be invited down to Atlanta for a listening session or whatever for climate change and health impacts. And I was fortunate enough to get some sponsorship out of the health organization there in Montana, and me and Melly had went down there, and it was broadcast live all over the United States and other countries, and being able to get up and speak at that engagement, being one of the first speakers that got up and spoke and talked about, when you talk about vulnerable populations and disadvantaged populations and minority populations, that we're right here, we're being impacted just like you are, and in order to find a solution, we've got to be part of that circle so that we can add our voice and what our needs and our concerns are, and that we've got to make the movement to keep our voice as loud as possible, because we come from this segment that doesn't always get invited to the table, isn't always there, but when we get the chance, we've got to be there, we've got to be vocal, and we've got to be loud. And we've got to be heard and let everybody else know that we were here first and that we will be here when the end comes, if it does. But believe you me, we're going to be heard.
Thank you. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and I really want to salute our panelists for just an excellent, excellent job. Let's give them another big hand. And given that this is our fifth and final plenary and it's holistic, I'm going to invite Laura Hansen up to make some holistic synthetic observations, I think, across this plenary and the whole NAF. Just a small, yeah, it just won't be hard.
The session is still to come. This is not the closing plenary, it's just the final plenary. So I could not be more thrilled with this panel. Thank you guys so much. And the questions were great because they basically covered much of what I wanted to cover. But one of the things that came up to me as we all met for breakfast this morning and we had a little chat about what people were doing, and obviously all of the abstracts that were submitted, because all of these folks applied to get to be on the final plenary. Like, they sent their proposal and said, this is why we're holistic, which was awesome to get to read. But in doing that, you reflect on the fact that we have California, a usual suspect, Florida, a less usual suspect, but a very vulnerable place. We have Massachusetts, which is kind of a usual suspect. And then we have Montana, which I'm willing to bet most of you don't even think about Montana on a regular basis. But they also do not have a state government that is accommodating to this. And yet these kinds of holistic adaptation activities, which all have a lot in common, are happening all in all corners of the country. And I think there's great lessons that can be learned from what they're able to do in California with a mandate versus what they're able to do in Florida with a mandate as well, just not one that's explicitly about climate. And how can you apply that where you are? So the recognition that climate isn't a political issue, it's a societal issue. And it's not even just a societal issue, because it's not just about people. Thank you, last questioner, who reiterated that point. It's a planetary issue, it's an earth issue, it's a natural system issue. Even if you don't personally interact with natural systems every day, to your knowledge, you are. In the Bay Area example, they're dealing with water issues. Those are natural system issues. And keeping that as part of our planning, because we can't all live without them. Clearly, the folks in Montana are living a lot closer to them than someone who might be living on the coast in Florida or in a city in the Bay Area or in an urban center in Massachusetts. But how can we integrate all of the pieces that we've heard across the 4 previous plenaries, as well as these folks are all doing, should be a goal for all of us. But obviously, even what they're doing has not solved the problem. So I don't want to decrease your ambition by just saying, do what they're doing and you're done. So thank you all very, very much. And now I have to do some really boring things, but these are the work of a meeting. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone knows that there is the Association of the American Society of Adaptation Professionals is having an election right now. If you want to identify with a professional society, you could join in that, but you can't vote if you don't join. Apparently, it's not quite like voting in a national election, but pay attention to that if you're interested. It's a great opportunity to identify more and have a voice in the field. So that's ASAP is their name, and they have a booth out in the hall. Secondarily, there is still a lost and found. There are still things in it, including car keys that someone might need to go home. There are also glasses, so if you can't see things, they're there over at the registration. Thirdly, there are some programs. Not everyone who asked for a paper program picked one up, so if you want one to commemorate the event and put on that bookshelf full of reports, you could have one. Those are also at the registration desk. But in exchange for picking up a program, or even if you don't pick up a program, please leave your lanyard and your name tag behind so that those could potentially be reused in the future. Your name in the name tag won't be unless you come again in 2 years. And then finally, I need the slide advancer. Finally, I want to remind you again that we are trying to help the city of St. Paul and the region, including the Frogtown neighborhood. Who doesn't want to help the Frogtown neighborhood with a name like that? Plus, it's actually a lovely neighborhood with all sorts of cool urban agriculture projects going on. Plant more trees because the ash trees that have been here are disappearing because of factors related to climate change. And there's an effort to replace them with Kentucky coffee trees. Yes, a tree that does not normally live here, but is moving into the region fast, and the Freeman maple. So in order to help with this process, because we know going online can be such a burden, we have people around the back with containers. Alex, could you hold one of those up? It's a very fancy container that you can make a donation in any form you want. Our goal is $5 from each participant, so we can give them $5,000 to plant a sufficient number of trees in communities to help do things like reduce heat island effect, in addition to just having trees in a city where they're losing them. Okay, There are a couple sessions still ahead, so I invite you all to give these folks another round of applause as you head out to the next section. Thank you all. And don't forget, when you see a federal employee today, give them a big hug.